welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about Last of the Mohicans, which is a Michael Mann adaptation of the old James Fenimore Cooper novel. Although Mann pretty much ignored most of the book, really. He actually based a lot of the film on an earlier adaptation from the 30s, which he said was much more interesting than the actual book itself. And so it counts, they actually credit the screenplay of that adaptation as well, because it took so much from that. But because Michael Mann, he took the general idea of what was there in the past, but he actually made his own film. It's very much a Michael Mann film, even though the world is very different from what he normally covers. He normally covers a modern world, modern technology, modern psychology. You know, Thief, Manhunter, Heat, Insider, Ali, all that stuff. It's all modern world stuff. I mean, Ali was set in the past a little bit, but not much. Not like pre-revolutionary America, which is 200 years earlier than anything else he was covering. So the thing is, Michael Mann, before this film, he'd made Manhunter and Miami Vice and Crime Story, which are all very modern-based films, or historical stories from about 20 years before, but it was still within the recognisable world to most people. Most people would understand where they were referring to, even in Crime Story, even though it was like 20 years earlier. It was still, viewers could see what they were talking about, and the conventions of the world he was actually describing. Before that, he made The Keep, which was made set in 1940s, World War II, and it was supernatural, and it was very different from his other films, and it was a complete failure. So coming back into Last Mohicans was a stretch for him, and it was something that it was in an area where he had failed publicly and disastrously, like almost career-endingly before. So he was taking a chance with this film, but he pitched it to the studio, to Morgan Creek, who were tied to 20th Century Fox, and they actually went with the idea. Now, Morgan Creek was a studio that was built by Joe Roth and another guy, I can't remember his name, James Robinson, and they made some interesting films. They actually put money into Dead Ringers and this film. The successes with the Young Guns films, but they were actually doing other films that were quite successful. They overextended themselves and they ended up basically doing not much else. But they did True Romance as well. They did a lot of early films, but they also were notorious in the horror area for being butchered. Nightbreed and Exorcist 3, or Legion. Both films I've covered. Both films were much better in original form. They were butchered by the studio. Things were added, things were taken away to be more conventional. They didn't understand these films, so they got hammered for that. And then there was a studio that had made Dominion later, the Schrader film, and then remade the film with Rennie Harlan, and it was a terrible remake of a film that was much better originally. So they kind of fell away. I mean, Joe Roth left early after Dead Ringers to run Fox Studios, so it became James Robinson in charge. But Last Mohicans was for Fox, so it was kind of a Roth kind of creation. It was kind of protected by 20th Century Fox, who I think had more investment in this one than did Nightbreed or Exorcist 3. So the film was made, it came out, and it was a hit. And it was an interesting hit because it just came out and people weren't expecting much from this film. It was like, well, we'll see. Michael Mann's a talent, but it's a new area he's trying. And it was starring Daniel Day-Lewis, who had won Oscars and been famous for committed performances in very serious films, very much, dramatic films. And he was now doing an action movie, which was weird. It's like, would anyone accept him as an action star? There was that. Madeline Stowe had been in a couple of films, but was not a star, and she was the lead lady. So there was that. Sorry if I'm rubbing my eyes a lot. I've got a cold in my eyes, so there's not much I can do with that. So there's that problem of there was not much to sell the film on beyond the film. So the film had to be good because everything they had to sell on, these were people who were about to become much bigger because of the film, but before the film was made, they really weren't very well known, or if they were known, they were known for other things. Thankfully for them, the film was terrific. The film was the thing that made everybody, because it went into the world it was trying to create and existed in that world. It explained things to you, but it expected you to keep up. It had a love story that was based on affection and a bonding rather than just trying to sell sex. It was about people who connect on a deep level almost instantaneously, and it's about how they kind of try and survive this terrible situation. It's about evolving loyalties. So it's about a lot of things within a rigid structure of an action story and a society that is very rigid. So it takes place in the French English Wars in America. So I've already covered Master and Commander, which is about the sea battles that took place later than this. Now this is the early part of just before the revolution. It's like how the British and French were fighting, how they were betraying the colonies, how they were brutal, and basically giving you an idea of why they eventually were going to throw the British out and have the revolution. It was that kind of thing. Is like that's all the stuff the British were doing, and the British assumed because it was their land, they were the masters of this land, that everyone would follow them, and people were starting to see like these guys are hundreds of miles away from home, needing support from us all the time, and they're just lying all the time. And so it became a case of, we don't need you anymore. So the film's about the kind of tension that's brewing that will lead to the revolution later. But it's not, it hasn't got there yet. It's also about the idea of the Indian nations and how they're dealing with this war, and how they're trapped in this war, and all the decisions they have to make to try and survive. So it's a complicated film. It was a film that was well received on release, but it was well received generally as a good, enjoyable, romantic adventure story. I mean, I remember the Sight and Sound review was horrible. It was made by someone who didn't have a clue. And it would have been snarky Michael Mann, who does all these techno thrillers, doing this thing. It was the most tone-deaf review ever, and it was because the film itself is romantic. It does take at face value the romance of the situation, but it does add context to it. So the sense is much more like something like a Murnau film, where it's like, okay, the people making this film are sophisticated, but they understand the allure of romance, they understand the allure of connection between people. Why do people connect to this idea? Why is it so important storytelling? Okay, it's important because people need to connect as people in life to keep yourself from going mad, especially in the circumstances a lot of people find themselves in life, which can be pretty horrible. So the film takes that seriously, and it makes a film about that, about the connections and bonds people make, how people change over time as they see the world differently from what they were brought up to see it as. And that becomes a story. There's like changing allegiances and growing bonds between people and why these happen. And it is also romantic if people want that romance. But it's brutal because they're facing a war. They're in a war. I mean, the first section of it is you find out that basically all the parties, most of the main characters get together because the Madame Bush, basically the Madeleine Stowe character and her sisters, they're travelling to see their father at a fort, not knowing the fort's actually being sieged. And they're ambushed by Mugwai and his people, who are basically Huron, who are basically going to be are out for revenge against the British for their war crimes, and because the British committed war crimes. And the lead character, the lead of the British, was involved in that. it's not like he's innocent. It was like he was given orders to do this, and he did things, and he's held responsible by Maguire for these crimes. So Maguire's going to kill his daughters and then kill him. That's his revenge on this guy. Hawkeye stops it. He and his adopted father. He's like a white person who his family was killed on the frontier. The Indians brought him up as one of their own, and he's a stepping stone between both worlds. He's white, but he understands the Indian way, and he's mentally Indian in lots of ways too, but not quite. He understands both worlds, so he's someone who can walk between them, and people trust him. And his adopted father, and his adopted brother come across this party, save the two women and the commanding officer, and they have to try and get to the fort, even though they've been stalked by the survivors of that party who are still out to get them, and they're hunting them through the wilderness. As they go to the fort, they find that a lot of the farms have been attacked and the people murdered on the farms by the Hurons to draw the people at the fort back to protect their families. So this is like war crimes for a purpose, because the French are trying to take this fort, so it makes it more easier for them to establish their rule over this area of Americas. So through that whole period in the film, you're getting to know the characters. You're seeing their position stated, like who they are, what the situation is for them, and what the beliefs are. And even then, you're starting to see beliefs being challenged. Like Stephen Woodman plays the commander who's in charge of the party, who's very much a loyal British guy who believes in the British way of doing things. So him and Hawkeye are pretty much at odds for the whole film. But the women are starting to see that there's a point to what Hawkeye is doing. There's a point to what the Indians are doing. They're starting to see that the Indians and the colonials, who are the colonial settlers, have created almost like a way to live with each other. And they're just trying to survive this massive war between these egomaniac parties, the French and the British. And everything's more grey than anyone thinks, and the best thing for anybody is to get rid of these bloody armies. When they get to the fort, everything gets more complicated. They report the deaths. The commander of the fort, who's the father of the women, refuses to let the people go because he knows it's a tactic by the French. And he's played by Maurice Reeves, who's a very good Scottish actor. He's referred to as a Scotsman throughout. So the whole idea is he's this big commander, but he's also, within the British Army, he's viewed as an anomaly. He's not got much respect because he's Scottish, because in Britain, Scotland's not exactly a well-respected country. Neither's Wales or Ireland. If you're not English, you're pretty much viewed as a serf. So there's that element too. He's defending this whole country that probably would not defend him because they see him as less a person. So he has to deal with this mutiny in his hands while the French are destroying his walls, and he's got an Indian out for revenge on him. So, I mean, even though he's done things in the past that aren't great, you do feel sympathy for him because he's in a bad situation and his own people are not going to help him out. And eventually the film, he has to surrender, and as they're escaping, the French double cross and get the Indians to attack the British as they travel back to Albany, which is where their base is. And at that point, the Indians are hunting Hawkeye, the two women, and the British officer and the Hawkeye's family through the land, as Mogwai wants his revenge. Even after he's killed the father, he wants revenge on the daughters as well. And he just builds and builds to terrific action scenes. Now, one of the reasons why the action works is you've had an hour and a bit of build up and build up and build up. You've had the politics, you've had the romance starting. You get a sense of these two people, Hawkeye and Cora, are very much, you know, people of their time who connect with each other, who understand how difficult the life is in this country, and are just connected. So you're really with them, and you see Hawkeye protect his own friends by helping some of the people in the fort escape to go and protect their families. So you're knowing these are the good people, but it's not overstated what you get in some films like the almost like Angels. No, there are problems. Hawkeye can be a bit of a dick sometimes. He's well-meaning, but sometimes he's a bit too sure of himself. And Cora's stubborn as well. So they're not like the people who mean well, who always try and work out the situation, but they do have their flaws, which actually makes them much more compelling characters because they care about themselves, they care about the others, they care about their families, and they're trying to get everyone out. They're not just trying to get themselves out; they're trying to get other people out. And you actually see that reflected in the Stephen Wanting character. He's arrogant, but you never get the sense that he actually doesn't care. He's a conventional way of seeing things because of the way he's brought up. And he will lie for his country. But you never get the sense that he's an awful, awful person. He does things you think are awful, but you do get a sense that there is a decent person below the damage of what's been done to him by his training. You know, which gets proven later on as he sacrifices himself for the people. But that's always there. There's a sense of a human being there, even though Hawkeye wants to slap him half the time. But it's not like a cardboard villain. He is a person who does have his wants, who is in love with Cora. He is rejected, but he doesn't act like a child after it. He has to accept it and move on. I mean, he does overreact a little bit, but well within the reason of someone's going a bit crazy and then they put themselves back from it. You know, that kind of level of understandable character thing of someone kind of goes about overboard and goes, oh, but that's not a good idea. So everyone's got their thing. Even Alice, who's the younger sister of Cora, played by Jodie May, she doesn't say much throughout the entire film, but you always know where she is emotionally because of the actress and the direction. You always know where she is, and even though she's not saying anything, you always have a sense of where she is. Someone slowly coming to realization of this world is very dangerous, and she's been sheltered, and you know, slowly becoming a person throughout it. And the end really worked because of its tragedy. People you like die. And to take down Mogwai, they have to go through hell. They have to track through the land. They have to, take out all his people before they get to him. And it's like the final 20 minutes of this film is astonishing. It's just amazing. There is action, but the action's all tied to the story. It's all tied to the characters. And it does feel like silent filmmaking in lots of ways, in the sense that nothing, even though the music plays a big part in it, a lot of what is important is done by looks and by movement of the camera, by the landscape, and the sense of where they are in the camera and where they are in the landscape. And there's just a sense of this world that's really dangerous. And a sense of them struggling through the kind of physical danger to actually protect people they love. So again, it takes what could be a conventional sappy thing, if it's done really badly, like it's done in most movies in Hollywood, and treats it seriously. Say, if this was actually realistic, we'll not throw in a lot of stupid stuff. We'll actually see what the problem of this person, what's the problems they have to face, and we'll take the melodrama seriously, and we'll treat it like it's a serious drama, but it's also an action-adventure story, it's also a love story. But we're going to treat it with respect for the audience. Like, why do you like this thing? It's something you wish Michael Mann had done more in his films after this. Because he did have an understanding of that genre. And it does float through his films, the idea of romance below the surface of the modern reality that he usually covers. But I think in some ways the old-fashioned values, these people were a bit more open with who they were, actually helped him release certain areas of his personality that can are a bit more shut down in other films, because he's dealing with reality as he knows it, and it's much more the emotions sneaking through in something like The Insider or Heat, rather than having it come full force out. So that's something where you think, I wish he'd made a few more of these films, these kind of older style films, because he does have a knack for it. But this is a beautiful film. This is one of my favourite films of the 90s. It really is. I mean, it's not Michael Mann trying to be the ambitious guy who did Heat. It's Michael Mann trying to do a film he really wants to make. And it's far more emotional and is more melodramatic than some of his other films. And it is probably my favourite melodramatic romantic film of the 90s. But it's so good, it's so dark when it needs to be, but it's also romantic when it needs to be. It's balanced, a really beautifully balanced film, and it's like a great example of how you do this properly. And most people cannot do this properly to save their lives. So this is wonderful. Last of the Mohicans is wonderful. It's a film you can rewatch for the love story, because love story is always good, because it's always done very carefully and understandable emotions. The drama of the war, pre-Revolutionary War, and showing you how the British and the French destroyed their chances, how horrible they'd been to people, and also their structures of command, and how everybody becomes a victim to these weird ideas they've got to try and keep power. Everything works. The whole film works beautifully. You've got an amazing Villain Mogwai who's complicated and bitter and twisted, and so you understand his motivations, but he's someone who's gone way too far and is totally psychotic now. And Westody is amazing as Mogwai. He's terrifying. So this is a wonderful film, so highly recommended. Go watch it. It's just wonderful. So that's me for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back later. Bye.